Moments in Crime. Ivan Milat. Ivan Milat was born on December 27, 1944 at Crown Street Women's Hospital in Guildford, New South Wales. He was the son of Yugoslavian emigrant and laborer Japan Marco Stephen Milat and Margaret Elizabeth Piddleston, an Australian national. Ivan was the fifth of their 14 children. The impoverished Milat family initially lived on a rural weatherboard cottage farm in Bossley Park, 36 kilometers west of Sydney, before relocating to Liverpool. By all accounts, Milat's parents were conscientious in raising, educating and disciplining their children and sent them all to Catholic schools. However, family members described Milat's father as having a temper due to his alcoholism. Many of the 10 Milat boys were well known to local police and were used to handling knives and firearms, spending their afternoons shooting at targets in their parents' yard. Siblings recalled Milat displaying antisocial and psychopathic behavior at a young age, such as attacking animals with machetes during their childhood, leading to a stint in a residential school at age 13. By the age of 17, he was in a juvenile detention center for theft, and at age of 19 he was involved in a shop break-in. Then in 1964 he was sentenced to 18 months for breaking and entering, and a month after his release he was arrested for driving a stolen car and sentenced to 2 years hard labor. Then in September 1967, age 22, he was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment for theft. On the April 7, 1971, Milat abducted 2 young 18-year-old female hitchhikers near Liverpool railway station with a knife. He raped one of the hitchhikers before they stopped at a petrol station cafe, where they managed to escape. Milat was arrested later that day and was charged with 1 count of rape and 2 counts of armed robbery. While awaiting trial, he was involved in a string of robberies with some of his brothers before faking his suicide by leaving his shoes at the Gap, a well-known Sydney suicide site. Authorities believe that Milat then fled to Queensland and Victoria before flying to New Zealand, where he lived for 2 years. However, Milat is suspected of having returned surreptitiously using a fake passport and lived interstate to avoid detection. He was rearrested in 1974 after his mother was taken to hospital suffering from a heart attack, but the robbery and kidnap cases against him failed at trial with the help of the Milat's family lawyer, John Marsden. Milat took on a job as a truck driver in 1975, and by the time of his arrest he had worked on and off for the Roads and Traffic Authority for 20 years. In 1977, Milat unsuccessfully attempted to rape and murder 2 women who were hitchhiking from Liverpool to Canberra, but he was never charged. Background. By the time of the initial discoveries in the Belanglo State Forest, several backpackers had been reported missing. One case involved a young Victorian couple from Frankston, Deborah Everest, 19, and James Gibson, 19, who had been missing since leaving Sydney for Confeist, near Albury, on December 30, 1989. Another related to Simone Schmidl, 21, from Germany, who had been missing since leaving Sydney for Melbourne on January 20, 1991. Similarly, a German couple, Gabor Neugebauer, 21, and Anya Habschied, 20, had disappeared after leaving a King's Cross hostel for Mildura on December 26, 1991. Another involved missing British backpackers Caroline Clark, 21, and Joan Walters, 22, who were last seen in King's Cross on April 18, 1992. Discovery of victims. A sign at the entrance to the Belanglo State Forest in New South Wales. On September 19, 1992, 2 runners discovered a concealed corpse while orienteering in Belanglo. The following morning, police discovered a second body 30 meters, 100 feet, from the first. Police quickly confirmed, via dental records, that the bodies were those of Clark and Walters. Walters had been stabbed 15 times, 4 times in the chest, once in the neck, and 9 times in the back, which would have paralyzed her. Clark had been shot 10 times in the head at the burial site, and police believe she had been used as target practice. After a thorough search of the forest, investigators ruled out the possibility of further discoveries. On October 5, 1993, a local man searching for firewood discovered bones in a particularly remote section of Belanglo. He returned with police to the scene where 2 bodies were quickly discovered and later identified as Gibson and Everest. Gibson's skeleton, found in a fetal position, showed 8 stab wounds. A large knife had cut through his upper spine causing paralysis, and stab wounds to his back and chest would have punctured his heart and lungs. Everest had been savagely beaten, her skull was fractured in 2 places, her jaw was broken and there were knife marks on her forehead. She had been stabbed once in the back. The presence of Gibson's body in Belanglo puzzled investigators as his camera had previously been discovered on December 31, 1989, and his backpack later on March 13, 1990, by the side of the road at Galston Gorge, over 120 kilometers to the north. On November 1, 1993, a skeleton was found in a clearing along a fire trail in Belanglo during a police sweep. It was later identified as that of Schmidl, and bore at least 8 stab wounds. 2 had severed her spine and others would have punctured her heart and lungs. Clothing found at the scene was not Schmidl's, but matched that of another missing backpacker, Habschied. The bodies of Habschied and Neugebauer were then found on a nearby fire trail, on November 4, 1993, in shallow graves 50 meters, 160 feet, apart. Habschied had been decapitated, and despite an extensive search her skull was never found. Neugebauer had been shot in the head 6 times. There was evidence that some of the victims did not die instantly from their injuries. Search for a serial killer. Examination of the remains showed evidence that some of the victims had been tortured. In response, on October 14, 1993, Task Force Air, containing more than 20 detectives and analysts, was set up by the New South Wales Police. On November 5, the New South Wales government increased the reward in relation to the killings to $500,000. After developing their profile of the killer, the police faced an enormous volume of data from numerous sources. Investigators applied link analysis technology and, as a result, the list of suspects was narrowed from a short list of 230 to an even shorter list of 32. Speculation arose that the crimes were the work of several killers, given that most of the victims had been attacked while as pairs, had been killed in different ways, and buried separately. On November 13, police were contacted by Paul Onions, 24, in the United Kingdom. A few years earlier, on January 25, 1990, Onions had been backpacking in Australia and, while hitchhiking from Liverpool Station towards Mildura, had accepted a ride south out of Casula from a man known only as Bill. South of the town of Mittagone, and less than 1 kilometer from Belanglo, Bill pulled out a revolver and some rope to rob Onions, at which point he managed to flee while Bill shot at him. Onions flagged down a passing motorist, Joe and Barry of Canberra, and together they described the assailant and his vehicle to the Borough Police. On April 13, 1994, detectives refound the note regarding Onions' call. His statement was corroborated by Barry, along with the girlfriend of a man who worked with Milat. Arrest and trial. Police surveillance of the Milat house at Cinnabar Street in Eagle Vale commenced on February 26, 1994. Police soon learned that Milat had recently sold his silver Nissan Patrol shortly after the discovery of the bodies of Clark and Walters. Police also confirmed that Milat had not been working on any of the days of the attacks, and acquaintances also told police about Milat's obsession with weapons. When the connection between the Belanglo murders and Onions' experience was made, Onions flew to Australia to help with the investigation. On May 5, 1994 he positively identified Milat as the man who had picked him up and attempted to shoot him. Milat was arrested at his house on May 22 on robbery and weapons charges related to the Onions attack after 50 police officers surrounded the house. The search of the residence revealed various weapons, including a .22 caliber Anschutz Model 1441-42 rifle and parts of a .22 caliber Ruger 10/22 rifle that matched the type used in the murders, a Browning pistol, and a Bowie knife. Also uncovered were items belonging to several of the victims. Homes belonging to Milat's mother and 5 of his brothers were also searched, uncovering several more items belonging to victims. Milat appeared in court on May 23 but he did not enter a plea. On May 31 he was additionally charged with the 7 backpacker murders. On June 28 Milat sacked James Marsden, his family's lawyer, and sought legal aid to pay for his defense. Meanwhile, brothers Richard and Walter were tried in relation to weapons, drugs, and stolen items found on their properties. A committal hearing for Milat regarding the murders began on October 24 and lasted until December 12, during which over 200 witnesses appeared. Based on the evidence, at the beginning of February 1995, Milat was remanded in custody until June that same year. Milat's trial opened at the Supreme Court of New South Wales in Sydney on March 26, 1996 and was prosecuted by Mark Tedeschi. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Milat is reported as having been confident he would be found innocent. In phone recordings made for the ABC's Australian Story program in 2004, Milat stated his grounds for believing he would be found innocent at trial: "My basic defense in my trial was that it wasn't me. I don't know who did it. It was up to them to prove my guilt, not for me to prove my innocence. His defense argued that, in spite of the evidence, there was no non-circumstantial proof Milat was guilty and attempted to shift the blame to other members of his family, particularly Richard. 145 witnesses took the stand, including members of the Milat family who endeavored to provide alibis. On June 18, Milat gave evidence himself. On July 27, 1996, after 18 weeks of testimony, a jury found Milat guilty of the murders. He was given a life sentence on each count without the possibility of parole. He was also convicted of the attempted murder, false imprisonment and robbery of onions, for which he received 6 years imprisonment each. Final years and death. In his 2004 interview on Australian Story, Milat denied that any of his family had been involved in the 7 murders. On January 26, 2009, Milat cut off his little finger with a plastic knife with the intention of mailing it to the High Court of Australia to force an appeal. He was taken to Goulburn Base Hospital under high security. However, on January 27, Milat was returned to prison after doctors decided surgery was not possible. Milat had previously harmed himself in 2001 when he swallowed razor blades, staples, and other metal objects. In May 2011 he went on a 9-day hunger strike, losing 25 kilograms in an unsuccessful attempt to be given a PlayStation. In May 2019, Milat was transferred to the Prince of Wales Hospital, Randwick, and was subsequently diagnosed with terminal esophageal cancer. Following his treatment he was transferred to the Long Bay Correctional Centre to continue his custodial sentences. On August 9, 2019, a terminally ill Milat was moved to a secure treatment unit located at the Prince of Wales Hospital following the loss of 20 kilograms in previous weeks. He was also exhibiting a high temperature. His status, however, was reported as not life-threatening. On October 27, 2019, Milat died from esophagus and stomach cancer at 4:07 a.m. within the hospital wing at Long Bay Correctional Centre. He was 74 years old. Prior to his death, Milat wrote a letter to his family requesting that his funeral be paid for by the New South Wales government. The request was denied by New South Wales Corrections Minister Anthony Roberts. Instead, his body was cremated with the full reimbursement of costs to be paid from his prison account. In his final days, New South Wales police said in a statement that their officers visited Milat 8 times, in prison and in hospital, in an attempt to elicit a confession from him. However, Milat did not confess. Various strategies were deployed on each occasion, including different combinations of detectives and utilizing recorded interviews with victims' families as an investigative technique, the statement said. No further information was received or provided to police during the interactions. Although Milat died never having officially confessed, he is said to have previously admitted to his mother, with whom he had a close relationship, that he was responsible for the backpacker murders. Incarceration and appeals. On his first day at Maitland Jail, Milat was beaten by another inmate. Almost a year later, on May 16, 1997, he made an escape attempt alongside convicted drug dealer and former Sydney councillor George Savas. The plan failed and Savas was found hanged in his cell the next day. Milat was subsequently transferred to the maximum security section at Goulburn Correctional Centre. In November 1997, Milat appealed against his convictions due to a breach of his common law right to legal representation, as established in Dietrich v. the Queen. However, the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal dismissed the appeal. In 2004, Milat filed an application with the High Court of Australia that he be allowed special leave to appeal on new grounds. The application for leave was ultimately dismissed, affirming the Court of Criminal Appeal's decision to disallow his initial appeal. On October 27, 2005, in the New South Wales Supreme Court, Milat's final avenue of appeal was refused. In 2006, 2 other application attempts were rejected as well, as was one in November 2011. In 2001, Milat was transferred to one of the 45 new units at the High Risk Management Corrections Centre, SuperMax, at Goulburn Correctional Centre. In 2006, a toaster and television given to Milat in his cell caused a public outcry. Additional investigations. Police maintain that Milat could have been involved in more murders than the 7 for which he was convicted. State and territory-wide investigations into the unsolved deaths and disappearances of young people were started in 1993 by Task Force AIR by comparing Milat's known criminal and victim profile along with his known modus operandi to cold cases. Milat was taken into consideration in several of the 58 cases on the list. Experts have highlighted how it is unlikely for any serial killer to start killing at such a late stage. Milat was aged 45 when the 1989 murders were committed, and that serial killers almost always start killing before their mid-30s. This indicates that Milat likely killed before in his life. Milat's brother Richard once opined that there would be heaps more bodies out there waiting to be discovered. Also, Milat was very geographically mobile as he started working as a truck driver in the mid-1970s, transporting tires via Adelaide, Melbourne and Brisbane to Goulburn, Yass, Canberra and Perth. Based on almost identical similarities in modus operandi, 3 unsolved murder victims were identified who Task Force Commander Clive Small listed as having a high possibility of being Milat's victims. On February 26, 1971, expectant mother Karen Rowland and her sister were traveling in separate vehicles to a motel in Canberra. However, Karen never showed up and her abandoned car was discovered that evening in an undeveloped location. The next day at work in Liverpool, Milat allegedly boasted to his co-workers about having murdered someone and buried the body under bushland. On May 3, 1971, at the Air Disaster Memorial in the Fairburn Pine Plantation near Canberra, Karen's bones were discovered 15 meters off a footpath. Her cause of death was not established and the murder scene was eventually contrasted with those in the Belanglo State Forest 20 years later. Milat was 26 years old at the time of her murder and worked at the Department of Main Roads, which meant he frequently drove between Liverpool and Canberra. Milat is also believed to have driven a gold-colored Ford Fairmont similar to one seen by eyewitnesses chasing a woman matching Rowland's description in Canberra on the night of her disappearance. Rowland's presumed murder was never solved. On November 13, 1987, unemployed 18-year-old Peter Letcher set off to hitchhike to his parents' house in Bathurst but never arrived. His bones were found by bushwalkers on a woodland track close to the Jenolan Caves tourist site on January 21, 1988. Letcher's body was found lying face-up in a small ditch full with leaves and branches. He had been handcuffed, shot 5 times in the head with a .22 caliber gun, repeatedly stabbed in the back, and possibly sexually assaulted. According to Milat's estranged wife, in the days preceding Letcher's disappearance Milat took her once to the Jenolan State Forest to see a dirt track and a pine plantation, since Milat was working in the area. Letcher's murder took place shortly after Milat's wife left him. On September 6, 1991, 29-year-old mother Diane Pinocchio traveled to the Lake George Hotel in Bungendore. She informed a friend she planned to hitchhike back to Queanbeyan, and at approximately 11 p.m. she left the motel alone and headed toward the Kings Highway. On November 13, 1991, 2 employees of the Forestry Commission in the Talaganda State Forest, 40 kilometers south of Bungendore and southwest of Canberra, discovered a person wrapped in pine branches, lying face down. She was wearing only her underwear and trousers, and her 7th thoracic vertebra had been stabbed. A knife wound to the spine causing paralysis fitted Milat's modus operandi. The way her clothes were arranged implied that she had been sexually assaulted. Pinocchio's murder took place during Milat's known killing spree. She was murdered between the January 1991 slaying of Schmidl and the murders of Neugebauer and Habs-Chied in December. Other cases of interest which were investigated included a series of unsolved disappearances of young women in the Hunter region south of Newcastle that were originally thought to be the responsibility of a separate unidentified serial killer. On December 30, 1978, Leanne Goodall, 20, was left off by her brother at the Muswellbrook railway station. She traveled to Newcastle to meet her parents before departing for Sydney. At 3:30 p.m. that day, she was last seen at Newcastle's Star Hotel. Goodall was reported missing in February 1979. Milat was a road worker in the area in late 1978 and early 1979, and was known to frequent the Star Hotel. Robin Hickey, 18, went missing 4 months after Goodall disappeared on April 7, 1979. She was last seen at 7:15 p.m., at a bus stop opposite her home on the Pacific Highway at Belmont North. Police closed their brief investigation on the assumption she had disappeared of her own accord. A later witness claimed to have seen Milat at the Belmont Hotel on the night before Hickey vanished. Amanda Robinson, 14, disappeared on April 21, 1979 while returning home to Swansea following a high school dance in Gateshead. She got off a bus and was last seen walking along Lake Road. Police started a thorough investigation, but the teen's case ultimately went unsolved. Amanda Zoles, 16, Was last seen on October 12, 1979 when a neighbor walked her to a bus stop on Tudor Street in Hamilton at 6:30 p.m. Zolys was en route to Newcastle's Christian coffee shop on Hunter Street. At 10:15 p.m., Zolys called her father from Hamilton South, Newcastle, saying that she needed clothing since she planned to visit Queensland. She has not been seen or heard from since. Her disappearance is suspected to have been related to other disappearances in the area, but no evidence has been found to support this. Other possible victims of Milat are: Annette Briffa, 18, was last seen in Asquith, a neighborhood in northern Sydney, on January 10, 1980. Susan Issenhood, 22, vanished from the Mayfield neighborhood of Newcastle after being dropped off by her brother close to the Stag and Hunter Hotel, before she hitchhiked to Terry. Anita Cunningham, 18, and Robin Hoynville Bartram, 19, both student nurses who shared an apartment, left Melbourne with the intention of hitchhiking to Queensland. Gabrielle Yankee, 18, and Michelle Riley, 16, made the decision to hitchhike from Brisbane to the Gold Coast. Lydia Knotts, 21, a German national, was last seen at a friend's address in Chapel Hill, Queensland, on October 31, 1976. Narelle Mary Cox, 21, went missing on a trip to Noosa, Queensland, to visit an old school friend. Barbara Carol Brown, 22, an American national, was last seen in New South Wales on May 17, 1978. Stephen Lapthorne, 20, and Michelle Pope, 18, were last seen in a car traveling from Lapthorne's home in West Pymble to Pope's home in Barora. Alan Martin Fox, 22, and his girlfriend Annika Adrianson, 17, left Barora Heights to go to Kempsey and Byron Bay by hitchhiking. Tony Marie Kavanagh, 15, and Kay Doherty, 16, were last seen at a bus stop heading to a disco in Wollongong. Kim Sherry Tier, 17, disappeared in East Melbourne around September 1979 with her black and white border collie while she was attempting to travel to Adelaide. Elaine Johnson, 17, and Carrie and Joel, 18, were last seen in Cronulla. Aspiring nurses Deborah Bakken and Gillian Jameson, both 20, were last seen conversing with a man wearing a wide-brimmed cowboy hat in a Parramatta tavern. Joanne Lacey and Leslie David Toshak, both 20, were reported as missing on April 20, 1981 after leaving Sydney to hitchhike to Byron Bay on a surfing trip in northern New South Wales. Carmen Verheyden, 22, was last seen hitchhiking on the Hume Highway in Casula, close to Liverpool, at 12:30 a.m. After leaving a party, she was observed sitting outside the Crossroads Hotel with the intention of going back to her home in Westmead. Melanie Merrill Sutton, 14, and Chad Everett Sutton, 16, were last seen by their mother in Inala, Queensland, at 8:35 a.m., when they departed for school on foot. In conclusion, the impact of Ivan Milat's crimes on Australian society has been immeasurable. The shock, fear, and trauma experienced by the victims, their families and the wider community will never be forgotten. Milat's actions have also exposed the flaws within the system and led to changes in the way crimes are investigated and addressed. The backpacker killer will go down in history as one of the most notorious and reviled criminals, whose actions continue to have a lasting impact on the fabric of Australian society. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to let me know you like this content, and also if you have any suggestions of what you would like to see in the future, please feel free to leave your suggestions in the comments section. See you soon and please stay safe.